Good morning, everyone. Let me welcome all of you, all the delegates from South Asia, the resource persons from South Asian nations, along with the ED and IDM, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, for a very, very important event which we are doing jointly with the UNESCAP, Southeast Asia. And we are joining hands together for this particular webinar on investing in innovative solutions to manage cascading disaster risks. This is very, very important, topic which we have chosen together. And as we have been observing that classic example of Japan earthquake, and then led by tsunami, and then tsunami to nuclear emergency, flooding. So that was a cascading into extreme climatic events. So how we are going to actually see this in the time of COVID, and also the cyclone which we faced very recently, Cyclone Apan or Cyclone Isaac. So the same people at the grassroots level, they have been handling whether it's a climatic disaster or climate-induced disaster or any other disasters like COVID pandemic. So we thought that how to have a kind of innovative solutions for managing such kind of challenges in the new normal. And so we gratefully extend our heartfelt thanks to UNESCAP and all the distinguished speakers who have actually accepted our invitation, like Miss Tizania Bonapes. She's there from as a director ICT and Disaster Risk Reduction Division, UNESCAP. We have Dr. Salimul Haq, director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development. We have Dr. Giriraj Amarnath, research group leader, Water Risk and Disaster International Water Management Institute, Sri Lanka. We have Mr. Kamal Kishore with us, the member of the National Disaster Authority, Government of India, and Dr. Rajiv Sar, distinguished professor in the Graduate School of Media and Governance and Kyoto University, Japan. And we have with us also Dr. Nagesh Kumar, director and head of the South and Southwest Asia office, which is based at New Delhi. We have Dr. Sanjay Srivastava from UNESCAP and Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal. I extend my heartfelt thanks for this particular investing in innovative solutions to manage cascading disaster risks. Now I would request Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal to give a opening remark. Major General Bindal, please, for the opening remark, please.
Thank you, Professor Santosh, and good morning to everyone. Heartiest welcome to all the participants and to the eminent panelists who have been just introduced by Professor Santosh. And I am really thankful to Dr. Nagesh Kumar from UNESCAP Southeast Asia Chair, with whose collaboration we are starting this three-part webinar series on global issues. And hopefully this will be the start of a collaboration which will carry further in research projects in other places. This particular topic has been chosen with lot of care and lot of deliberations between Professor Santosh and Dr. Nagesh Kumar, because it is becoming, I'll say, very, very common now that the disasters within disasters, or sometimes we are calling it chorus of disasters, is becoming a new normal also, where a casual chain, it generates secondary disasters from the interaction between the anthropogenic and ecological systems. So despite the major efforts by the international community, many challenges are still present in efforts to mitigate such phenomena. I'll just give you three examples. One in 2007 in Cyclone Sidr, which struck the southwest coast of Bangladesh with about 240 kilometers per hour winds and a 6-meter storm surge. That time, water and sanitation infrastructure was heavily damaged, which included more than 11,000 tube wells, more than 7,000 ponds, and over 55,000 latrines were destroyed. So as human waste was generally not treated, so waterborne diseases became a major public health concern. In many communities, drinking water sources like tube wells and ponds were contaminated with salt water and debris. So, in this connection, further research is needed to understand how the specific needs and strategies at the local level can affect broader strategies for affecting or mitigating disasters. The eruption of the Icelandic volcano Isofalkul in April 2010 is one of the events that has raised the tone of the debate about cascading risks. Although its direct physical damages was limited, just I think about 100 people were casualty, it released an ash cloud that temporarily stranded 8.5 million airline passengers. Similarly, triple disaster in Japan, which has been mentioned by Professor Santosh in his opening remarks, on 11th March 2011, had serious consequences in terms of loss of life and long-term impacts on the environment. So cascading risks and cascading disasters have serious limitations, implications for national risk assessment process. New strategies have been employed to address such failures, cascading failures, increase resilience, and share information on possible common paths for the disruption of the infrastructure. In recent years, constant technological and scientific progress has led to cross-domain modeling of interdependent systems and economic impact assessment of critical events. So together with research on empirical approaches, agent-based models, and interoperability input-output models, there has been an evolution in network-based approaches that aim to describe the connections and interlinkages between the nodes of such critical infrastructure required for the resilience. For instance, I'll give an example of Denmark. To improve the anticipation of crisis, the Pandora project, which was initiated by the government of Denmark, has developed its forward-looking self strategy. A key driver in the approach is to approach complexity before the possible events occur, involving different stakeholders in promoting awareness, in sharing information, and in planning. Thus, in an increasingly interconnected world, emergency planning needs to consider the existence of these such intersectoral factors and identify the less evident connections that could modify the need for such assistance and coordination. And for this, innovative ways of working collaboratively, as well as tools, data collection and management methods, risk communication, and knowledge sharing approaches will be needed to achieve progress in disaster risk reduction. So today's webinar is a very apt to address all these issues, and with the lineup of the panelists that we have, it will be really enlightening to see what all can be done or what are the possibilities, what are the futuristic plans that can be planned on. So I'm keen to listen to all of them, and I once again welcome all the participants and the panelists for gracing this webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Professor Santosh.
Thank you very much, General Bindal, for giving this a very important introductory remarks that how we can lead this challenging situation and what kind of initiatives which we can design in the framework so that, as you also referred about the Japanese, this triple emergency kind of a cases along with this Denmark initiatives. Thank you very much. I extend my heartfelt thanks to you for being with us. Now, may I request distinguished panelist of the day. We are starting with Dr. Salimul Haq, who has been the domain expertise in climate change and share some insights on the dual crisis of biological and extreme weather events in the context of future climate scenarios and how COVID-19 exacerbated the challenges and what have been the successes and lessons learned in this context. That would be very, very important, especially we have seen Cyclone Ampan as well as also the floods at the different parts of the southern Asia. So I would request Dr. Salman Haq to kindly deliberate upon this.
Thank you very much, Professor Santosh and the organizers for inviting me. It's my pleasure to join this very stellar panel. So let me start by saying that my work is primarily looking at the impacts and adaptation to human-induced climate change, which is a longer-term problem, but we are now beginning to see that happening already. It's no longer something that will happen in the future, but something that is already happening. And as you've already mentioned, it is now particularly part of this cascade of events. We have the biological public health problem of COVID-19, but the climate change problem has not stopped because of COVID-19. It is continuing. And in our part of the world, we recently got hit by a super cyclone Amphan. Cyclones are normal, but super cyclones are not normal. Super cyclones in the past have killed more than hundreds of thousands of people. So one of the good news is that in Bangladesh now, and also in neighboring West Bengal, we can now effectively evacuate. In Bangladesh, we evacuated 2.5 million people who took shelter, and the death rate came down to a very small handful, mostly fishermen who were out at sea and couldn't get back to land. And so we have made very great strides, particularly in cyclone preparedness, evacuation, cyclone shelters, etc. And right now, as we speak, Nepal upstream of us, as well as Bangladesh in the northern part of Bangladesh, is suffering from severe floods from the Brahmaputra River, which is overspilling its banks right now. And so floods, cyclones, which are normal events, are now going to become even more severe and frequent because of climate change. So that's a particularly important cascade. The biological COVID-19 problem is an additional factor where particularly the need to do social distancing became almost impossible. In the cyclone shelters, they are extremely crowded. It's not possible to maintain any kind of social distancing. And so this cascade or multiplicity of emergencies is now a genuine problem that we all are going to have to face. Particularly, I think our region all of us have these problems, and therefore we can all learn from each other. So going forward, I will focus a little bit on the work that my colleagues and I are most involved in. As I'm a university professor, I teach students. We focus our attention mostly on how to empower people, to enable them to know what to do with the knowledge. And although it's always also useful to have high-tech solutions, satellite images, communications, etc., in my view, empowering the communities and the people themselves is an extremely important part of the puzzle, and often can be extremely effective as well. And I'll just cite the example of our cyclone evacuation program in Bangladesh, which, as I said, is an extremely effective one. One of the major factors in it is school children. All along the coast of Bangladesh, school children do demonstrations, they do rehearsals, they know what to do, they have assigned households, particularly older women, to go and make sure that they get evacuated and go to the evacuation centers. And it's a very, very effective system to make sure that nobody is left behind. And as I said, school children are the ones that are empowered, enabled, and are very, very effective tools of or vehicles for making this effective. Another very important element is the use of technology, which is now ubiquitous as well. In Bangladesh, we have almost universal mobile phones, and a large proportion of them are also smartphones. And people can actually track the cyclone on their smartphones now and figure out how long they have to get to the shelter, and then go to the shelter just when they need to go to the shelter. So this just-in-time taking shelter has become quite an effective tool that people, citizens, ordinary citizens, can figure out what to do with the knowledge that they have and the access to information that they have. So building on that, going forward, as Major General Bindel has said, I think we have a tremendous opportunity in the region, across the countries in the region, to collaborate in these kinds of learning, capacity building, providing training and tools to our citizens, and enabling them to understand the problem, to be able to get information in time, to take actions to prevent the maximum damage. We can't prevent the events from happening, the cyclones, the pandemics, the floods, they will happen. But we can certainly minimize the damage that they will do by empowering our people. And that's really the most, in my view, the innovation that we are already doing, that we need to scale up and we need to share with each other, because knowledge is universal. It's not just one place does something good is not enough. We're going to have to learn from each other, and each time we need to analyze and see what worked and what didn't work, and then build on that. And the cyclone preparedness program in Bangladesh, I would say, is a very good example of that. We have a learning system where every time we learn from it. Just one example, and I'll end with that, is the design of cyclone shelters in Bangladesh has changed over time. Initially, people didn't want to come because they couldn't bring their animals. Now we build them on a hillock where people can bring their animals, tether them, and then go into the shelter. And then a lot of women didn't want to go because there was no ability for them to have their own facilities. Those are now being built into the cyclone shelters. And then nowadays, the latest ones even have ramps for disabled people to be able to go up the shelter on the top. And all of them now have solar power so that they can be used as community centers at the other time. So we need to be continuously learning from what is effective and what works and what doesn't work, and share that knowledge with each other. And to me, that's an extremely powerful tool and possibility to help us deal with these. Unfortunately, they are going to remain with us. If anything, they're going to get worse. And so we are going to just have to be better prepared going forward. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haq, for giving an insight from Bangladesh and that how South Asian nations can come together in terms of creating empowering people. And we say that we cannot prevent disaster or events, but definitely we can prepare well. And with the notion of the new cyclone shelter strategy fitted with this solar energy and then accessible to the livestock as well. So this is a very good example to be emulated elsewhere also, and how much that exchange of knowledge and information between the countries in the South Asian nations. Thank you very much, Dr. Haq, for the first intervention, for giving this insight. I would request now she is there, Ms. Tizania Bonapes. So I would request to give her remark, and then we will move to Dr. Giriraj Amanat after her as on water risk disasters. So can I request Mr. Dania Bonapes, please, from UNESCAP?
Good afternoon, colleagues and ladies and gentlemen. Major General Bindal, very good, actually morning, I think, for you all. I do apologize for having entered this webinar a little late. I had a computer problem, but fortunately I was able to resolve the issue with the help of our colleagues from our ICT operations section through the mobile phone. The good old mobile phone solved the problem. So it's my pleasure to deliver a few remarks. And first of all, just to extend on behalf of ESCAP a very warm welcome to everyone in the webinar. ESCAP is very pleased to have the opportunity to be jointly organizing this webinar with NIDM. And it's the first in a series of 3 events on building resilience to the cascading disasters through regional cooperation. And South Asia is now witnessing an unprecedented, at least in living memory, an unprecedented collision of a pandemic on the rage and extreme weather events. And last month, So last month, it was the typhoon tropical cyclone Amphan and Nisagra that hit the east and west coasts of India as well as Bangladesh. And this month, widespread monsoon floods have hit Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. And in Assam and Bihar states of India and adjoining Nepal, nearly 4 million people have been displaced by the heavy flooding, with the death toll rising to almost 200 people. And so despite having no direct link, floods and COVID-19 are peaking together, creating challenges that have never been dealt with before and turning South Asia into a hotspot of cascading risks. So how can the region move forward? And I'd like to offer 3 proposals for your consideration. One is the need to capitalize on innovations. There are several known unknowns regarding the transmission of COVID-19 and its intersection with the climate extremes. And in confronting these uncertainties, we will be called on to innovate. And I'd like to draw two examples from South Asia itself. First is the Arogya Setu, developed in India, which has now emerged as the world's most downloaded COVID-19 tracing app. And according to the latest report by Sensor Tower, the total downloads stood at 128 million as of July on Apple's App Store and Google Play stores. And it has helped the government to tackle twin objectives of whom to test and where to test more. Second, Google has deployed its artificial intelligence systems, and it has run hundreds of thousands of simulations on its machine learning models to predict floods with better accuracy. Jointly with the Central Water Commission of the Government of India, the company piloted a program last year which was able to predict floods and the regions near the Ganges that would be most affected. And this prediction was done with an accuracy of over 90%. So when risks intersect and cascade, we need solutions that are integrated and that are driven by innovations. And the COVID-19 fiscal stimulus packages, which with their priority on digital transformation and building entrepreneurial skills of SMEs, enables us to capitalize on this opportunity and to scale up innovations that protect at-risk communities. Second, the multi-hazard early warning systems that need to be risk-informed. And accurate risk analytics is essential to managing the disaster pandemic nexus. And as seen from the response to the 2 cyclones, the substantial lead time of the early warning combined with the impact-based forecasts allowed authorities in both India and Bangladesh to repurpose the shelters along diverse stratified community risk profiles. And it was interesting to hear the previous speaker, Dr. Hux, talking about how each cyclone brings a new learning experience and how the design of cyclone shelters has gone through a whole series of adjustments to meet the needs of people and the importance of sharing this experience and this knowledge, because knowledge is universal, and ESCAP very much shares that same perspective. And so a composite risk matrix approach that included the impact parameters of Amphan as well as those of COVID-19 has contributed to the design of a very complex system of evacuation shelters for 3 million people informed by specific vulnerabilities as well as needs. And of course, the learning is a continuous process, and it will need to be ramped up as the impacts of the pandemic evolve. And ESCAP's analytical work and a policy brief that was recently issued will focus on these converging crises and will provide guidance on the way forward for integrated risk analysis. And so I would warmly encourage you to have a look at this policy brief that was recently issued. And we will also be working with the WMO and other partners on operationalizing impact-based and risk-informed early warning systems. And I'd also encourage you to review our recent publication, When Crises Converge, Responding to Natural Disasters in South Asia During COVID-19. And ladies and gentlemen and friends, my final point is on regional solidarity. No one is safe until everyone is safe. And this crisis, we need to view it as an opportunity to reconsider how we build our resilience, not just to COVID-19, but also to an uncertain future where on the long run, the climate change impacts are going to be very big. And as someone was saying the other day, climate change has no vaccination, and neither does it respect national boundaries, nor does it respect sovereignty of nations. And on 9th of July, earlier this month, ESCAP, through its sub-regional office headed by Dr. Nagesh Kumar, organized a virtual high-level policy dialogue, COVID-19 and South Asia. And the dialogue was attended by the UN Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, as well as the Secretaries Generals of SAARC and BIMSTEC and key ministers from the region. And it was a very lively discussion on how to shape the contours of regional cooperation to address shared vulnerabilities and cascading risks. So we very much look forward to the discussions of this webinar, and we are very sure that it will help all of us strengthen our ongoing efforts. It will also help us to operationalize the ESCAP Asia Pacific Disaster Resilience Network on strengthening regional cooperation. And together, we look forward to working with you all to build back better with disaster resilience. So thank you so much once again, and wishing you all a very fruitful webinar, and looking forward also to the second one that we will be organizing.
Thank you very much from this UNESCAP as a head, also committing yourself as a SCAP, that how we can strengthen the regional solidarity for this climate change, which is doesn't have the vaccine, and how to be the technology can be brought in, whether it's artificial intelligence and other for impact-based risk-informed early warning system in this in the region. And this is a very, very important, and how SCAP is working, an analytical study which you have referred to, and how we will be moving forward jointly with the South Asian nations. It is the first in the series, and second and third would definitely give certain road ahead also to move upon. Thank you for sparing your valuable time and giving this assurance that how we can you would be supportive, your organization would be supportive in terms of taking actions. Thank you so much for being with us. And I would request, if you have time, you can continue with the discussion. Thank you very much. Now I would request the other panelist, Dr. Giriraj Amarnath, as Ms. Bonapa already mentioned, that Nepal and Bangladesh and India is getting affected by flood already in this arena. And Dr. Haq, with your domain expertise, Dr. Amarnath, with your domain expertise in the water, please can you discuss analytics-based solution such as index-based parametric insurance developed by IWMI, and also that how marginal farmers, because we are talking about the financing risk also. At one side, technology and how technology can also help in bringing financial tools into the parallels of disaster risk management in terms of COVID-19 and climate change scenario. So, so I would request you, Dr. Amarnath, to the floor is yours to please share your viewpoint, please.
Thank you, Dr. Santosh. Am I audible now?
Very much, very much.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Indeed, it's a great opportunity to share our observation, and it's a very collective webinar being hosted by NIDM and UNESCAP. We really congratulate the initiative led in this process. And you raised an important point, and the previous speakers have really highlighted the importance of risk management, whether the need of multi-hazard warning, and the excellent message by Mr. Huck on the usefulness of how a cyclone like Amphan, the process of cyclone shelters have able to reduce the loss of life. I would just step 1 minute out back and come to the insurance focus. While we have seen that the world is taking control of the COVID pandemic, another global crisis is already ongoing. Like we have seen the state like Assam or the Bihar, which is ongoing with the serious flood events happening, which in fact look at the last 30 years of catastrophic losses. 30% of these losses occurred in the last 2 years just. So it shows the magnitude and severity of these disaster events. And we are nowhere near the end of COVID-19 crisis, so it's never too late to start revamping and revising the strategy that was highlighted by you and ESCAP colleagues. And speaking of that, the recent events like including the flood as well as the cyclone really highlight the importance of disaster risk financing. And as you rightly mentioned, Mr. Santosh, the importance of smallholder farmers are among the most vulnerable to climate shock. International Water Management Institute, being the member of CJR, equally give a focus on vulnerable smallholder farmers. While the reason is a lot about lack of education or the available technical skills, the risk is still inherent in their agriculture inputs, whether buying a quality seeds, fertilizer, or understanding the climate information. They may not have all the resources in place, and there might be a lot of low investment in enhancing their capacity, adaptive capacity. So I believe that technology is very critical in improving the resilience of smallholder farmers, and also not just look at insurance as an exercise or a prototype that could able to uh, um, reduce all the risk. What it could help them is to build back better. So International Water Management Institute over the years have been developing index-based, or a parametric insurance focusing on different perils, whether it is flood or drought. What we do is we use computational models like flood model, use high tech remote sensing information embedded with crowdsourcing information. The idea is the community should have less dependency on technology in terms of the complexity it produces the data. We translate that with the diverse stakeholders, whether it is MFI, whether it is working with agency like Oxfam in Bangladesh, or working with microfinancing companies in India as well, to ensure that whenever there is a borrowing is happening from the communities, their risk is transferred through the index parameters like we will be speaking now. I think what we have done is a flood insurance region like Bihar. We looked at what is the duration of the flooding, how long the water remains in a given location, and we do a robust modeling with the insurance company to design an index product, which is tested over 20 to 25 years, and then look at over the communities how they could able to manage the risk. So this has been tested over thousands of households, both in India, Sri Lanka, as well as Bangladesh. And the idea is to look at how these how this can. how this can be part of the pre-disaster, post-disaster, and during the disaster. So we might need to look at entire phases of the disaster cycle. And this has been launched, and there is a lot of policy consultation. We recently even organized a good South Asia level consultation meeting in SARC in Gujarat. The idea is to look at more such mechanisms need to be improved, tested, and look at the viability of the product when it comes to large scale risk measures. Now, one step additional, we also need to look at not just insurance will play the entire segment of the process, but we need to look at more in the preparedness phase. What is the risk strategy we need to look at in the post-disaster recovery? For example, the flood-affected communities, if we speak of, should we provide a better land use policies in those regions? It's not only insurance will address all the problems. So access to seeds, access to climate information should also be embedded in the wider disaster risk financing strategy. And again, while we have a lot of schemes that are available in South Asia, speaking of India, we have Prime Minister Crop Insurance Scheme. We might have more on a post-relief based assessments are available. But I think increasingly we have to see how risk management should be looked at cross sector, and bringing different countries' experience or the best practices when it comes to risk management solution, and helping them to become more effective in managing their own risk. So with that, I would want to explain here. We are just looking at first of its series happened in Nagaland, where Nagaland Disaster Management Authority has recently looked at multiple perils, wherein they are talking about not just flood or drought or hailstorms or humidity. So this is going to be the India's first disaster risk through the parametric product. I believe like the states, other states will come on board with the excellent initiative just started in Nagaland, which is an program that is being built upon Swiss Re with Tata AIG insurance company in India. So there are a lot of welcoming evidences and trials are happening already. And equally, all these solutions need to be a more of a gender sensitive response strategy has to be looked at. It's not just about a section of farmer. We have to look at more collectively the disadvantages group, the poverty lines of those communities, to ensure that the remote areas looks at those fragile communities who would also have access to diverse risk instruments that are being developed by the governments across the South Asia. With that, I stop here, but happy to contribute during the discussion session. Over to you, Santosh.
Thank you very much. You have mentioned very importantly that insurance is not the only solution. We have to combine with other initiatives as well, and specifically accessibility and resource and so forth. Important. And also you mentioned about this Nagaland experiment on insurance, where this first parametric insurance after Gujarat, which we are talking, Gujarat earthquake insurance was there, but that was not parametric. Here is the parametric which is being trying out. But you said that it is all to be included with other dimension as well, and you highlighted the gender sensitiveness and in much more inclusiveness. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Amarnath, now I would request Shri Kamal Kishore ji, who is a member of the National Disaster Management Authority, Government of India, and also the member of the COVID-19 Empowered group set up by the government that engages startups and entrepreneurs, leverage and their innovations in the scaling up in the contact tracing and diagnostic. Mr. Kamal Kishore ji, could you discuss the successes and challenges of contact tracing with Arogya Setu pandemic, and overall your remarks, entire management of COVID-19 along with other disasters? I welcome you and I request you to kindly deliberate upon.
Professor Santosh. First of all, I would like to thank NIDM and UNESCAP for taking this initiative and for organizing this event on a very important topic. I would like to limit my remarks this morning to 5 key points. The topic this morning is to discuss how do we invest in innovations, particularly in the context of cascading disasters. So the first point I would like to make is that in the last 5 to 10 years, there is this notion which has gained prominence that innovation means technological innovation. I think we really need to sort of move away from that. Technological innovation is just one aspect of innovation. There's also the issue of how do we innovate in terms of institutional arrangements? How do you make innovations in your economic system to manage risks? So, has to go beyond the notion of just doing hackathons and talking about artificial intelligence and big data and machine learning. All of these things, I may sound a little critical of it, but sometimes they come across more as flavors of the month rather than well thought through how these things will be implanted or how these things will be appropriated by society. Technological innovation is not a substitute for efficiently, properly, in an accountable manner functioning institutions. So there, I think it is very important we talk about institutional innovation as well. If we look at wherever we are having successes in containing the spread of COVID-19, it's not only because of technology, it is because of institutional innovation. When you look at Dharavi, one of the largest slums in Asia, where the COVID-19 spread has been contained to a large extent. Yes, technology has played a role there, but it is also true that there is a lot of institutional innovation. For example, bringing in the so-called unqualified medical practitioners who work at the community level, who normally in a normal public health system, publicly funded public health system, will never bring them in because they don't have the necessary qualifications. In some ways, a formal public health system would discourage them. But it was very quickly realized that if you do not build an alliance with them, then they will not only the practices that they run, wherever there's somebody has feet, they go and meet with such a practitioner, and those practices become amplifiers of innovation. On the other hand, if you bring them in and work with them and train them in playing a role in containing the spread of COVID-19, then they become a player, an active participant in containing the spread. So I think that's one very important point that I would like to say, that we have to go beyond the notion of hackathons and machine learning and artificial intelligence to also talk about, I'm not against artificial intelligence. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that institutional innovation is as important, if not more important, than technological innovation. The second point, which relates to a key phrase in the topic of today's webinar, which talks about cascading disasters. Now, what is difficult about cascading disasters? The most difficult thing about cascading disasters is that they are very difficult to model. Past is no longer a good guide for the future. At each node of the cascade, the uncertainties are huge. As a result, whatever modeling prediction you do for the cascading impacts, they are highly speculative. It's very difficult to model them. General Bindal in his opening remark talked about the Icelandic volcano. Icelandic volcano affected flower growers in Kenya because they could not export their flowers to Western Europe in the summer. And it's a perishable commodity. If the airline stops for 2 weeks, then you lose your crop. Now, who could have imagined or come up with a model which would be able to quantify that kind of risk? So in that case, the only way to do it is to really have a multidisciplinary approach come up with the notion of generating reasonable worst case scenarios, and also having a constant dialogue with people who are on the front lines or communities themselves to actually generate these scenarios. It is very difficult to model this, but it is possible to generate reasonable worst case scenarios to be able to plan for that. So I think that, so we have to get around the problem of, there are some efforts at modeling, but there are challenges with that. So what is the kind of innovation we bring about to work at the intersection of multiple disciplines, bring in communities in generating risk scenarios to basically get around the problem of the difficulty of modeling these risks using the conventional approaches. My third point, and that is one of the key learnings so far from the pandemic in India and the rest of the world, is that we have to innovate in developing good feedback loops. If you wanted to write a thesis on unintended consequences of very well-meaning policy decisions, COVID-19 is giving us those cases across the world. It's not just India, everywhere. And places where governments have been able to handle this is where the connect with the ground is strong, and there's a strong feedback loop. In India, a lot of media articles talk about the fact that government issued, some 300 orders in the context of lockdown, and they say it in a negative way. I said that, actually that's a good thing, which means that the government is not locked into a decision. You sort of put in place a policy, and when you get a feedback from the ground that this is not working or this needs to modify, it responds to it. So I think the more iterative it is, the better it is. When 1.4 billion people going under lockdown, and within a couple of weeks the supply chain for the entire country was 90% restored. That cannot happen unless you have your ear to the ground. So the importance of having a strong feedback loop to basically evaluate the impacts or intended and unintended consequences of policy decisions is very important. That's the third point. My fourth point is this, that there is a discussion about community-based approaches to disaster risk management. The whole practice of community-based disaster risk management in a formal sense is at least 25 or 30 years old. But we often equate community-based disaster risk management as low-tech. I think this is a completely wrong notion. We really have to see that communities we really have to get away from that notion. Communities, the scale at which communities at the local level, in urban areas, in rural areas, are able to appropriate technology and use it to manage risk is really phenomenal. So we have to really get off this notion that community-based disaster risk management is low-tech. So if you're doing innovation at community level, then it has to be low-tech. That's simply not true. We should try everything, whether it is setting up early warning systems for the fishermen, or it is about providing mobile technologies to, a coconut harvester. There is ample evidence that people are very quick at appropriating technology and making it relevant to their context. My final point is that while I talk about, it's sort of a corollary of my fourth point, which is that there has to be a much greater emphasis on democratization of technology. There is a lot of example now from the current COVID where developing cobots in Jharkhand for managing COVID care facilities. So the more we make technology accessible to large number of people, high technology should not remain confined to a few group of people. They're reducing cost, making it accessible, democratizing access to technology is really key. Once that happens, innovation, using that technology in an innovative way, it happens automatically. I mean, people's entrepreneurial skill, we sometimes underestimate. So with that, I would close here and look forward to participating in the discussion the rest of this
Thank you,
morning or
Mr.
afternoon.
Kamal
Thank you.
Kishore, for bringing five very, very important points, and especially talking about the decentralization or democratization of this technology. And it's not that high-end technology is not feasible for the local community. And also you said that we have to think beyond this technology of artificial intelligence and others. So 5 points, I am sure that participants and delegates must have noted along with the resource person, which you have talked about this multidisciplinary approach, and specifically identifying that how the accountability and actually these institutions which are there to be functional institution to be strengthened. Thank you very much for bringing all those points on the floor. We will be discussing that also later. And I will invite now Dr. Rajiv Shah for giving this insight that how DRR has laid out in the Sendai framework. And Dr. Shah, could you please also highlight the key issues and benefits of the new analytics of cascading and concurrent disasters in the context, what your experience and what the other panelists have mentioned so far. Dr. Rajiv Shah, who is from Kyoto University, Japan. Dr. Rajiv Shah.
Thank you very much, Santosh ji. And I heard with deep interest with all other previous speaker who has given a very good overview. Thank you also for inviting me to this very excellent presentation and this session. I would like to share a couple of slides, and I hope my slides are visible. I would like to point my thought into two parts. The first part is the work which we are recently doing in with UNDRR, and then focus a little bit on what we are, what my own thoughts on this specifically for this particular region. You know that Kamal touched upon about the scenario. So we have we need to really think about the different types of scenario. We have the current pandemic, which is scenario A. We also seen earlier there are scenarios which the so-called the natural hazards or human-induced hazards actually forced biological hazards. We see many waterborne diseases, vector-borne diseases during flooding and so on. But what we are also expecting, the third scenario, which is the natural hazards plus pandemic. It means we have seen in Ampan, we have seen in many other recent flooding area in Japan itself. We are having flooding for last almost 1.5 months. And what Salim Bhai also pointed out about the climate change impact, this is the first time in the whole history of Japan that in July itself, in the first 10 days of July, we have 82 times incidence of 50 millimeter per hour, which is considered as a heavy downpour. Only within these 10 days, 82 time incidences in different parts of Japan of having this type of incidents. So yes, Kamal mentioned about this one. The scenario planning is, the modeling is a very, very important, challenging thing, but at least the worst case scenario planning is very important. And there again, we need different types of disciplines, not only just the disaster risk reduction, but also we need quite a bit of data science. We need to possibly identify that who are the most vulnerable or who are the most at risk in the cascading disaster, which is possibly different than the regular disasters. Of course, the rural or peri-urban population who needs evacuation during this pandemic, that's a very high risk. We already know all other different aspects of the high risk people, but I would also like to emphasize that the rescue team or the local government officials during the pandemic are also at very high risk. And also the DRR volunteers or the aid workers, like as we all understand, that the response is not just a government response, it's a multi-stakeholder response. And we often see many NGOs, many aid workers, many volunteers, they play a very critical role. So how we actually bring them into a proper safety measures during the pandemic, I think that's also a very crucial issue. And that's actually related to the earlier planning process, which we need to think about. The evacuation center management becomes a very, very critical aspect. These are some of the examples in Japan. Again, Kamal very rightly pointed out that innovation doesn't need to be always the technology-driven innovation. There can be many simple innovation, like how you make proper the health monitoring, the separation of spaces. I understand possibly in South Asia, the per shelter, like the the evacuees number per shelter possibly very high, that may not be able to give enough space for this type of privacy or making their private spaces. But I think that we possibly need to think about alternate shelters where it's not only just the designated shelter, but also think about the alternate shelter. So this is some of the very simple thing, like using just normal curtain, and which also gives the proper air circulation, because during the pandemic, I think the air circulation is very, very important to open up the windows and so on. Not during the cyclone, of course, but in the post-cyclone situation, I think that's very, very important. We recently worked with a couple of our team members, a risk assessment tool, which we found to be very, very effective during this pandemic. And this is what we call, like we talk about different aspects, the health, behavior, exposure, social policy. And that actually gives you some sort of very basic awareness or the risk communication aspect, and that data can be used by the local government for identifying the high risk population. And this jointly with the volunteer management, I think that's also one possibly, again, it's not a very very high-tech thing. It's a very simple web-based tool which can be used properly for the evacuation management or the shelter management. With our recent work with UNDRR, we talked about the systemic risk and its assessment, and that's always a major challenge. We need to, I won't highlight all the different issues, but a few important points is that we need to understand the non-linear transition of the biological hazards, that what we are saying that it's not always a linear curve. There can be exponential curve, there can be different types of pockets, there can be different types of density. That's one important thing. And the dynamic emergence of the SOPs, like we make an SOP, but that SOP always changes actually. So how we cope with this type of dynamic emergence of the SOP, I think that's very important issue. Bringing on the Sendai Priority. So we try to put a few areas to highlight on the Sendai Priority and the different targets, starting from the risk assessment to regulation to science-based governance, integrated early warning system. Some of the areas are highly relevant, some of the areas are possibly not that relevant when you talk about the biological hazards and its implication to the Sendai. So with that, let me go to the next part of my intervention, which is what I feel possibly there is the potential, huge potential in the region, but possibly we are not utilizing this one properly. One is that we have been talking DRR as a public goods for several years now. I personally joined a couple of these sessions during Sendai meeting in 2015, and there have been lots of discussion that there are some good public goods and bad public goods. I'm not going into the details of that, but DRR, possibly we need to promote more at the regional level, DRR, certain aspects of the DRR as a public goods. And that also goes back to what Salim Bhai has pointed out in his opening comment also, that how we share different types of lessons. I think that's very, very important. And I'd like to highlight this one, this open science policy. Like UNESCO have been trying this to lobby with many country governments, but possibly the penetration is still not that much. Like how we can make an open, accessible, efficient, democratic, Kamal also pointed out that one, democratic and transparent science policy. We often talk about the data sharing issue within the country, cross boundaries. So I think the open science policy is a very, very important aspect where we need open source, open data, open innovation. That possibly is still underutilized in the region, and we'd like to see some more emphasis. I hope that UNESCAP, along with some other organizations, regional bodies, whether for the South Asia it is SARC, or with the Southeast Asia with ASEAN, possibly can take up this one, of course, with UNDRR. The citizen science becomes very, very important, and how we utilize, how we actually engage and the people and the communities, the citizen. And there can be different types of involvement. It can be used as a sensor, it can be used as a reporter, it can be used as a social computer. So there are many different aspects. Again, all these words possibly sounding a little bit technical, but again, these are very, very simple solutions and simple aspects, and we often don't need the high tech. But by saying that, we also need not underestimate the importance of the new technologies which are coming up. And new technologies, I think the main challenge is that breaking the digital divide and bringing the technology to the people. And that's what I think, what Kamal also pointed out, that community-based disaster risk reduction possibly needs a new dimension. And this is still very, very relevant. It's 30, 40 years. I won't say this is 30, 40 years old concept. Possibly community-based disaster risk reduction has been there from ages before even the governance come. And then we now, in the recent period, we are talking about this for last 30, 40 years, but different types of disruptive technologies used, and specifically on not the high-tech innovation, but also the social innovation. How we develop the social innovation, how we engage the young people to more become as a social entrepreneur, to make the disaster risk reduction and the social entrepreneurship. Bangladesh is a classic example where we see many different social entrepreneurship on different development fields, be it health, be it gender, be it environmental management or water related issues. But I think this whole DRR field needs more social innovation. And at the regional level, we need more regional social innovation ecosystem, and that possibly we need to facilitate more. I would just like to give this example that there have been some recent very good publication that all these different technologies have its positive side, negative side. In the urban area, some technology works well. In rural areas, some technology works well. In the disaster phase, whether it is in the response recovery or whether it is the preparedness, possibly the use of different types of technologies are different. So we should not underestimate the use of the technology. But then again, technology does not mean that it has to be always the technological solution. It can be a very good social solution and the social innovation. And with that, we have been actually working, my university, along with 4 universities in India and a social entrepreneurship startup called RICA. We have been trying to do social innovation hackathon. I understand Kamal did not like the word hackathon in his earlier comment, but this is just to engage the young people of different disciplines, starting from computer science, then disaster management, then architecture, urban planning, civil engineering, all different discipline students. Actually, they try to think about some new innovation, new innovative idea, but addressing the social challenges. I think that's very, very important point. So my concluding remarks, I would like to end with these 5 key bullets. One is the systemic risk assessment. We have been talking again with the systemic risk for almost now 10 to 15 years. There have been very good papers, there have been very good publication, there have been very good research, but how we can make it operationalized, I think that's very important. And scenario planning is possibly the complex scenario planning, or the worst case scenario planning is possibly one of the key issues. And more, I strongly hope that more DRR countermeasures need to be promoted as the public goods, where there are equal access to the DRR countermeasures. The open science and the disruptive technologies can play some important role, and social innovation linked with this type of disruptive technologies will be more efficient if we can provide a proper regional ecosystem. And in that case, I think the South Asian universities or the young professionals. There are many good universities, there are many good professionals, there are many good academicians. So how we actually link them together and provide a good ecosystem to make the proper innovation. So I think that's all from my side for the time being. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Shaw, for bringing also 5 major points. And it talked about starting from the capitalizing youth and universities and what is existing in the South Asia region. And that we have seen that how during the earthquake of Nepal, this was demonstrated very nicely that South Asian nations approached and helped each other in terms of technology, in terms of responses, in terms of long-term recovery and technology. And also when I was heading the SARC Disaster Management Center, during that time also with large number of framework developed for different kind of regional and sub-regional kind of approaches. And this is very interesting that you brought about this how South Asian nations can come together for open science and then social instruments, mainstreaming DRR, and systematic risk assessment in the region as a kind of a web that each boundaries are connected with each other. So we need to look at that trans-boundaries disaster very comfortable. So now if I say this, now we can have a quick round of that 10 minutes we will spend on question answer from the delegates who have joined this webinar across the South Asian nation. To just kind of a 2 minutes brief, if I can give you so that you can collate your ideas and come out with the questions that we started with innovative technology, what Mr. Bindal mentioned in terms of reflections of different learning. And he also gave this importance of different connections in Denmark and also about this volcano example. And there you see that how entire gamut of DRR should get connected with the more with each other. And also when we talked about this technology and this when we talking about from UNESCAP side, but how we can actually support this entire this idea of regional cooperation. And Ms. Tizania mentioned about this that in currently that Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Bihar, and all are going under the flood. And in this, how this multi-hazard warning, risk-informed warning system could be developed. Also, that major point is the innovation and science and technology. She mentioned about artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. We heard also Mr. Haq mentioned about this Bangladesh experience in terms of quickly that how in Bangladesh people are very innovative, community-based initiatives have been very successful. Cyclone shelter management combined with the science and solar system, telephone connectivity, empowering people have gone very, very nice example which can be shared and emulated. We also had that insurance example that in this Nagaland, how it is happening when Mr. Amanat mentioned about this, the insurance is not the product to be taken alone, but it should be seen in the larger context of land use and risk management solutions. He did talk about this parametric and also gender sensitive and inclusiveness. Dr. Kamal Kishore also mentioned about these 5 major things where he talked about artificial intelligence and technology is not alone, but many, many things to be also taken. That is important, but that's not that is only thing which we need. We have to move ahead from that also and taking that into. Then he talked about accountability as a very, very important as a functioning institutions. And he did give the example of India's 300 the feedback system, that how 300 this law and more this orders issued by Government of India time to time as the need and what kind of feedback was coming, and supply chain management was ensured for the 130 crores of people. And he did say that community-based important initiative and technology is not that low technology is required at the community-based. Okay, he did say that technology is not only to be taken at that top level, but it's also be democratization of technology should also take place. Am I audible now? Okay. So these were the things which he mentioned, and of course, Rajiv Shaw, I initially summarized that what he said. So now house is open. If anybody would like to mention about his question, they can put it in the chat box, or also if they are just ready to share, they can come. Like one question which I say, founder treasurer from Youth Environment Development, saying yes, this is very important, knowledgeable lectures, and he has appreciated that in entire initiative. But he talked about innovative and local action is very, very important. But anybody else would like to, from the delegate side, who wish to actually ask question to the panelist? House is open for you for 10 minutes, please.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Ramesh. Yeah, Ramesh Sudan from UTF Jammu and Kashmir.
Okay.
Yeah,
please go ahead
sir,
with your question.
Yes, sir. Dr. Rajiv Shaw mentioned about social innovations, and also Dr. Kamal Kishore also said that social innovations cannot be technologically isolated, or they cannot go without technology. So I want to link the two and ask the same question to both the panelists, that social innovations, how do you see that indigenous technologies, because India is a very diverse nation and we have indigenous technologies, indigenous knowledge in all the pockets of country. So how do you link the social innovation with the indigenous knowledge of the people? And also, how do you see social innovation happening vis-a-vis DRR when we see that kind of academics, kind of knowledge we are pursuing in our formal education? Personally, I don't think that we have that much innovativeness in the curriculum.
Thank you for your question. Let us have another question. I see Lieutenant Colonel Vasist also mentioned about, must compliment Mr. Shaw for, but wanted to know more about social innovation in this. This is another question which is we see in the chat box. Another question is this building capacity of university. What is that take of the panelists in building capacity? Any more delegates who would quickly add to the question so that we can have reflection from each of the panelists? One or two questions. Good morning.
Sir, good morning, sir. I am Vasudevan from Tamil Nadu, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. As Mr. Dr. Saliha said, empower the people and community, enabling them to do social activities and all. There are a lot of people are expert in the disaster management sector, sir, which they are not known by the government, local bodies and all. So how to make a platform to identify them, then acknowledge them, but those who are already trained and having a wider knowledge in disaster management, they are not utilized properly for the rescue and evacuation purpose and all these things. So how we can? Hello.
Thank you very much for your question. Thank you very much for your question. We will take one last question. One.
Professor Santosh, can I speak, sir?
Yeah. Yeah, please.
I am Professor Satish Sinha from IIT Dhanbad.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was listening to and trying to learn plenty of things from your deliberations, very nicely being conducted, and the speeches of ma'am and other professionals who spoke on this. And if I saw a paper of Dr. Shaw, on that disaster science, progress in disaster science. So I am reminded of one word, progress in disaster science, vis-a-vis one thing, that respirable dust we used to study in our mining history, respirable dust. So later on we learned that respirable dust is not the respirable. It is something which is not to be respired. Respirable dust. That's how we are entering into the area of disaster progress in disaster science. You see what is happening. We have to.
Please be brief, sir. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I am hinting at that in the name of innovation, etc. Can we shift our attention from aided rescue to self-rescue? So prepare the community for self-rescue. In any community, there are young boys, volunteers, etc., etc. Teach them, learn them. These are the preparatory parts which we prepare because if we take little down, human rights part also comes into. We have no right to expose our countrymen to some kind of flood or something like that. So it is better that we prepare and shift from, aided rescue. So everybody is sitting and soliciting help to convert them to self-rescue. So this is
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. If you want to listen something more, I can tell.
Yeah, please, quickly, if you can say in half a minute, please.
Sir, Dr. Kishore has raised some concern about AI and the cascading models also he was talking about. So cascading models, if we are thinking of driverless cars, so we can also very well model disasters using AI technology and further deep learning technology and further quantum analog computing technology. These are technologies we are working on this. So these areas can lead, and social innovation is the answer, I tell you, but subject to we leverage all these technologies.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for making a very wonderful initiative in terms of this. So now I would, if we don't have any question now, where time is also running out, we will have a quick round of response from our panelists, starting from the question came from Jammu Kashmir, that how social innovations and indigenous technology can be brought in, and empowerment of people from this Bangladesh experience, and how to identify people, those who are having skills but don't have the platform, and build their capacity, and also that mining experience, that how mining as a self risk management kind of things which go into. And last but not the least, the question which after today is when we are talking about artificial intelligence, without like the example of taking a cascading model of science could be also brought in. I would request the panelists, so we can start from Dr. Kamal Kishore and also Professor Rajiv Shah to come on, and then we'll go so and so forth. So Dr. Kamal Kishore, then, since they have started asking questions about you from your presentation, and Professor Rajiv Shah, then we will move on to Mr. Girish Amarnath and Mr. Kamal Kishore, please.
Thank you, Professor Santosh. I hope this is a choice type question. Answer any one, or do we have to answer all of them? I hope it's just one.
No, you can take as a holistic view and give your remarks.
I will just answer the first question, which is about the social innovation and use of indigenous knowledge and indigenous technology. I think there are 3 points I would like to say in that regard. The first point I would like to say in that regard is that there is, first of all, I think we have to use some other language to talk about indigenous technology. Actually, these are quite sophisticated, locally applicable technologies. The second point I would say is that we have to develop a tradition of systematically and rigorously documenting what these indigenous technologies are, because what is the danger is that in our sort of romantic notion of these indigenous technologies, sometimes we sort of do not take enough care when trying to cross transfer them from one part of the country or the world to another part of the country. So these are some of these technologies, some of these knowledge systems are highly context specific. So I think that is very, very important to remember. For example, if you talk about earthquake resistant construction in the Himalayas, you know, what will work in the Western Himalayas will not work in the Eastern Himalayas, because different kinds of materials are available in different locations. Different types of building skills are available in different locations. So the same traditional system of Dhaji Diwali that is there in Jammu and Kashmir and Himachal will not be something we can easily transplant to, say, Sikkim. So I think that's the second thing I would like to say. The third is that while those of us who live in urban areas work on issues from a national vantage point, we talk about, the so-called indigenous technology with a lot of respect, and we want to preserve and conserve them. A lot of the time, the aspiration at the local level is the opposite of that. So, I may prefer a Dhaji Diwari house, but, people want to move to a concrete house. So we have to talk about how those transitions are taking place, how aspiration is driving those transitions, and how those transitions need to be managed in a way that we do not build risk. Thank you.
Into perspective, and that one size fit to all will not work. So maybe we can romanticize, but we need to look also that how that can be scalable at different places. And good example of Dhaji Diwari you have mentioned. Dr. Rajiv sir, would you like to mention? Then I would, after you, I would request that comment from Salimul Haq sir, because it's all technology and community. Dr. Rajiv sir.
Thank you very much. I think social innovation is such a vast area. I must say that I am still learning, and I'm still learning from different fields. And more I try to learn from different other fields, more I see its impacts or its usability in the disaster risk reduction is getting higher. For last 2 years, with my university, with UNU, United Nations University, then Tohoku University, and a couple of other universities in Japan, we have been trying to document what are the innovations. We call it 30 innovation series. So we have now two series of documentation. And when you talk about the 30 innovations, like what are first document we did, what are the key 30 innovations on disaster risk reduction. And the recent one, what we did was how the 30 innovations are linked to the SDGs and the disaster risk reduction. And the innovation, like there are some product related innovation, but there are also process related innovation. And most of the process related innovation are very much linked to the local communities, their context. So the point is that how we actually try to analyze that, and how we try to see that whether this can be usable, the usability part of that particular innovation to other contexts. So my stake about the social innovation is that, yes, it's not that all social innovation works everywhere equally. It's very, very context specific. It's very, very culture specific. So we need to possibly understand the local context and local culture. But there are huge areas, be it the emergency response or health or gender, water, education, agriculture, early warning systems. So there are many different types of innovations which exist. So the point is that how we actually engage the young professionals to develop those or analyze their innovation and try to link it more the social entrepreneurship model. And when we talk about the social entrepreneurship, this is a social business model, what we are thinking about. And there, my stake is that there are already many social business model which exist in different areas, whether it is the microfinance, whether it is the water sectors, whether it is the gender issues and so on. And the DRR field possibly can learn a lot from application of those social business model from those sectors, and try to see that how we can actually apply these into the disaster risk reduction. Thank you.
Very much for bringing new perspective or mention about 30 innovation series and how the universities of South Asian nations can get together, especially the YEPs, young professionals, and to be taken the program exchange, so that the social entrepreneurial model of other sector could be brought in the DRR sector, and scaling it up. And so I would request now Dr. Salimul Haq Saab, what Professor Rajiv Shah mentioned and Dr. Kamal Kishore mentioned in the context of the questions which we talked about, scaling up the model and applying those innovative traditional systems which are already available with the community, which they do not have the platform and they have to scale. Dr. Sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Santosh. And thank you to the questioners as well. So picking up on what Kamalji and Rajiv just said, I just want to share with you some innovations that we think we are doing in Bangladesh, where we are bringing together both the knowledge component people, the universities, researchers, together with the action component, including government officials, as well as farmers, fishers, ordinary citizens, and sharing that knowledge. And it's about going up a learning curve together. There were some questions about how do we build on what we have. So we have set up a platform which we call Gobeshana. Gobeshana is a Bangla word for research. And we have brought together more than 50 universities and research institutes working on broadly climate change related topics, but disaster risk reduction is obviously a major element within that. And we have a website where we share information. We have more than 2,000 publications in a searchable database. We have a researchers group that meets once a month and shares the research. And then every January, we have a big annual conference where we bring in the users of information and the producers of information, and we share that between ourselves, and we see how do we go up a learning curve. It's about learning together, collective learning as a country, all of society. And I would like to invite all the panelists, including Rajiv, if you can maybe give a presentation on the open science. I really like that. The next conference will be from the 21st to the 24th of January, 2021. I'll invite ESCAP and all the other participants to also come. It'll be online, so we will certainly be able to design a session where we can do this collective learning exercise from bottom up and top down. I think that, to me, is the key opportunity, innovative opportunity for us to take forward. And there are many experts with a lot of experience and knowledge here that we might be able to harness and bring together. So I leave with an open invitation for everybody. I will follow up with you to maybe run a session during our conference in January. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haq, because bringing with the Goshna as the stage. You have already said that Gobeshna is a platform where people come together in the month of January and share their experiences. With the permission of everyone, the panelists, we are just extending for this interesting dialogue, which is going on 10 minutes from our original time schedule. And if everybody says yes, then we will move ahead. And we will have in the meanwhile, Dr. Giriraj Amarnath for your comments, please. What you have been saying and the kind of questions which are coming, how the risk modeling will go as a community-based initiative.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Santosh. I'm not really a big expert of social innovation, but I just picked up some example of what we have been doing in the program of disaster risk insurance program. While we can say that technology can really bridge the gap between communities and the policymakers, I would give an example of insurance. A couple of years before or a decade before, insurance is still a topic, but people think that it is a game ball between the government and private sector or the insurance company. Today, this has been increasingly been understood by communities living in the disaster-prone region. For example, the communities who are living in the region are today measuring the water level and providing the photographs of the flooded areas. They are also providing the regularly assessment of what the information they are collecting in the field. My observation here is that when we talk about social innovation, it is all about collecting the data from the communities itself. So the more you collect the data, the better the understanding what they know about it. And we are also translating the technological information that are simply in a graphics or in a way that can be in a short video. They are understanding in a local language. The more the adoption is happening, the better the innovative policies and instruments, particularly the financial instruments, can be reach out to those communities. So I think increasingly the industries are also engaged in risk modeling, reinsurance, and the banks are providing innovative, like when it speak of agricultural loan. I think while they are increasingly doing, there is a section of communities like others have spoken. We need to empower those communities who really understand the complex data sets we generate from the model or from the satellite data, and ensure that whatever they are borrowing from the loans through MFI or anything, really helping them to reduce the risk from the household damages through the flooding or to any other disaster. So I think collective data collection is an important step that will take a big leap in moving in this field of overall risk management cycle.
you very much. Before I go for the wrap up, I would like to have a kind of the questions which we have taken from the delegates who have been participating from across the South Asia, and our panelists have been able to respond to their questions. But I would like to have a quick last comment from each of the panelists in one word before I request Dr. Nagesh to pitch in for that. Along with the before this panelist, I would also request Major General Bindal to give a quick final comment. Maybe we can start with Mr. Haq itself. Mr. Haq, have any final point, one point as a takeaway from here to the South Asian nations?
Thank you very much, Professor Santosh, and thank you everybody for an extremely interesting session. Let me just end by reiterating my invitation to everybody to join us at the next Goveshana conference from 21st to 24th January. I will send out a general invitation, and let us see if we can design a specific session which I would like to focus on this learning top-down, bottom-up meets top-down meets bottom-up solutions for dealing with the disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this final comment from you as a take-home. Now, Dr. Giriraj Amanath, would you like to say a last final point as a takeaway to the Southeast? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I think many of the regions in South Asia are already doing a great job in disaster risk financing, using a lot of computer models. I think equally we need to focus on improving our existing comprehensive financial protection strategies vis-a-vis with developing innovative policies and instruments that will really help them in safeguarding the risk the communities is already facing through this climate shock.
Thank you very much for giving this insight, strengthening the financial tools and empowering people for building financial resilience. A quick comment from Mr. Kamal Kishorji. Would you like to say a final comment as a takeaway?
Well, my final takeaway is that I will accept Dr. Salimul Haq's invitation next January. And in terms of what I have to say, I think we have to just take a very full, broad view of the notion of innovation in the context of cascading disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamal Kishorji, for taking this. You're talking about the innovation for this top-down, bottom-up approach. Now coming to this, Mr. Rajiv Sir, Professor Rajiv Sir, would you like to underline any point?
Thank you. I would like to just reiterate that we really need a regional social innovation ecosystem to support a regional social innovation ecosystem. And I would really love to see the students from different countries, from different disciplines, they are coming together, discussing the actual problem, actual ground reality problem, and generating some real innovative solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Shah, for underlining the final point. Can I request General Bindal to underline takeaways as a final remark from himself? General Bindal, please.
Thank you, Dr. Santosh. Takeaways, there are many, so I will not dwell on that because they have been reiterated time and again. I will just give an example. During the Srinagar floods, when I was involved in the response and rescue operations, there was a shortage of doctors, and there was shortage of compounders and nurses in the community, which were already flooded. And due to religious beliefs, they were not ready to take on outside help, especially if the gender was not matching. So what we did was we requested the same community, if there is a doctor available, then we started one boat in every locality, whose only job was to collect the doctor, and we used to get the medicines from our stores, and he used to be taken house to house to look after the medical ailments of the people. And that became a huge success. We saved so many lives right wherever they were, in situ. We didn't have to evacuate them, because the structural medical response was mostly mostly encumbered by the relief camps or the evacuation centers wherever a large number of people had evacuated. So this type of a social innovation I'll talk about is lost. It is lost because while we are doing the case study, while we are doing the documentation, somehow these small actions which the community, local community does, the community heroes who emerge, they do, are not documented properly. And hence this uh, bottoms up approach which Dr. Salimul Haq was talking about gets lost somewhere in the whole bargain. And when we do the case study, which maybe after a few days, after a month or so, it is mostly desk review and limited field study. So that is one point I will emphasize on also. And second is the modeling. We have to get out of our offices. The persons, researchers, academicians, and the modelers have to go and do field visits as much as possible and as real time as possible so that they understand what they're doing. And during the scenario presentation, already it has been spoken earlier that community should be involved in making the scenarios and creating scenarios. Scenarios can be umpteen number of scenarios. So parametric scenarios can be created. So that process needs to be developed. And I agree with the last point which was given that a regional social ecosystem should be there where social innovations and students and researchers can come together. I think that is necessary so that the case studies and the lessons learned at local level is brought to the national level. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, General Bindal, for bringing and reiterating that point that community is in the nucleus of everything, and investing in innovative solutions when we are talking about for cascading disaster risks. Everything has boils down to the community, and what Salim Haq Saab has mentioned, that we need to think differently in the framework of bottom-up approach. Dr. Nagesh, you have been listening to all the presentations and deliberations made by our panelists and the people who have joined, delegates from all over the South Asia. They have raised these questions. I would request you to give the concluding remark from SCAP, and you have been the head of the South Asia, and what are the commitments you are thinking which we can take forward as a together NIDM and SCAP partnerships. Dr. Nagesh Kumar.
Thank you, Professor Santosh. I think this was a very, very rich discussion. I don't think we could have spent the 90 minutes that we spent on this better in any other forum. I think each one of the speakers, very distinguished speakers, added value to our understanding of cascading disasters. And South Asia, I think time and again we have emphasized that South Asia is the most affected region from the disasters, most vulnerable to them. And while we have been facing the onslaught of COVID-19 pandemic, we have been facing all kinds of disasters like super cyclones, flooding, and all others. So we need to really, think through and brainstorm how we can manage the situation better, because these disasters, when they happen, they reverse development gains of years, if not decades. For instance, the ESCAP has recently brought out a policy paper on COVID-19's impact on South Asia, and we found through simulations, CG modeling simulations, that up to 130 million people could be pushed back into extreme poverty because of this disaster. That means reversing the work of a decade, in poverty alleviation. And so flooding also displaces millions of people, and in cyclones, we see a lot of devastation of infrastructure. Thankfully, we are able to save lives because of early warning systems, accurate early warning systems. So what we said in that policy paper is that now that governments are mobilizing billions of dollars in stimulus packages, why not we do these stimulus programs in such a manner that the recovery that comes out is not only inclusive but also more sustainable and more resilient. So we build a more inclusive and resilient future at the end of these disasters. So this is the time when we have to turn the challenge into an opportunity. Second thing which came out from this discussion very well, and which was also highlighted by the ministers of economy and planning of South Asian countries who met on 9th of July to discuss the COVID-19 impact on South Asia, is that these disasters are all transboundary, and whether it is COVID or floods or cyclones, they are all transboundary. So we need to find cooperative solutions together. And for COVID, of course, a SARC emergency fund has been established at the initiative of India, and which was very highly appreciated by all the ministers. But we need to work together to make sure that all of these disasters are really handled very well through cooperative solutions. And in this discussion today, number of good points have come out, including the regional social innovation ecosystem. And I also like that the sharing of good practices and good experiences, including the institutional innovations, social innovations that Mr. Kamal Kishore was referring to. So a lot of energetic and creative solutions are coming up in all different parts of South Asia, and there is no reason why we should not benefit from them, each one of them. And so discussions such as this are very productive and fruitful, and they are needed much more as we are facing the brunt of these disasters increasingly. So I think we will continue to work with NIDM, and I must say that it is a pleasure really to work with NIDM and General Bindal and Professor Santosh Kumar, who are always very supportive of any collaborative ideas. And in this time of calamities and disasters, I think partnerships are most critical. And so we need to build productive partnerships such as the one witnessed today. And we will continue to work with you on such more productive, more fruitful discussions. On that note, I want to thank every one of the speakers, and finally, General Bindal and Santosh, yourself, for this very productive, very rich morning spent on disasters and how do we contain them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nagesh. I would definitely extend my hearty heartfelt thanks to UNESCAP, Ms. Tizania Bonavis, and also Dr. Nagesh Kumar, Dr. Sanjay Srivastav, and Madhurima for actually making this happen. And we worked very hard from our side, Major General Bindal, who supported this initiative and partnership and gave the go-ahead for this important webinar. And also extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Salimul Haq for giving this insight, Dr. Giriraj Amarnath, Mr. Kamal Kishore from member NDMA, Dr. Rajiv Saw from Kyo University, and of course, Dr. Nagesh Kumar for building and shaping this webinar together. And I would extend my heartfelt thanks to the delegates, not only asking questions, but participated and giving a lot of feedback in the chat box, and which is very encouraging. I extend my heartfelt thanks to my team, Dr. Radha Maurya and the IT team who work, but she is managing the whole show from the background and along with the SCAP team. I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you and for a wonderful, successful events. And we have takeaway, which you have already mentioned, the delegates. I don't want to repeat. We have exceeded the time by 16 minutes. So, and once again, thank you so much. And we take this permission from all of you to call it off and close this workshop. General Bindal, can I get the permission of closing, and Dr. Nagesh?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Sanjay Srivastava, thank you very much. You are behind the scene, but I extend my thanks.